Alright, so I guess the room's full, so I'm just going to go ahead and start early so we can all go to lunch. Alright.
You got the touch. You got the power.
Awesome, cool. Thanks to Drew in the back who made that video for me. That's Stan Bush. Most of you may know that from Transformers, but by the look of the people in here, most of us probably weren't even born when that song came out. So, alright, quick show of hands. Okay, that one guy right there, thank you. Quick show of hands. Who in here is professional developers? You're indie, Mindy, you know, alright, cool. How about students? Cool. How about just other people who thought the title of this talk sounded really cool? Awesome. Fantastic. All right. Of those of you who are professionals, how many of you have actually made a touchscreen game? All right. So there's like 5 or 6 of you I'm going to insult really bad. Awesome. Fantastic. Cool. So before I get going, first off, a little bit about me. That's me. I'm a zombie. It's pretty sweet. My name's Shonkwiler, as it says up top. It's a little bit cut off, but cool. I am, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm still recovering from GDC, so I didn't get to practice this talk as much as I wanted to. Cool. So if you have a smartphone, go ahead and take it out, put it on your lap. I want you to tweet along, make fun of me on the Twitters. Also, if you have the games that I'm going to be talking about, play them while I'm talking about them. So that way, if you're playing games, I think you're doing what I told you to and not paying attention. If you don't have a smartphone, keep it in your pants. Don't text anybody, especially your mother. So cool. I'm Shonkwiler. As I said, I've been designing touchscreen games at a company. Oh, I also run the IGA 30 chapter. Ooh, that's our sweet logo. I work for a company called Megatouch Games in Philadelphia. We make bar-top touchscreen games. We've been doing it for about 15 years, so long before other people figured out that you could actually do touchscreen games. But I've been there for 3 years. I'm a designer, and I've shipped about 31 games there. So a lot of touchscreen games, a lot of fun. But a few years ago, we've been making games on this device for a while, but a few years ago a little device came out that you guys may have heard of called the iPhone. And everybody else realized that, hey, we can make touchscreen games, and it's really cool. So it kind of rocked the whole industry. As you can see, I found this random chart that shows that a lot of games have, devices have been sold, so a lot of games are being sold on those. So we decided to start making iPhone games too. We've made 5 iPhone games. These are our 3 most popular games so far, but we still focus on our core market, which is the bar-top touchscreen games. It's pretty crazy. I actually didn't know much about my company before I started there, but we distribute our games in 33 countries, 20 different languages, and over $1 billion flows through our games a year, and it's something like 200,000 plays a month go through. And then our iPhone games have sold close to 1 million copies too, so pretty cool stuff. But that's enough about me bragging about myself. Let's actually talk about something interesting. So here's what we're gonna talk about. We got the first off, I'm going to talk about the casual market. Next, I'll do a brief history of like game controllers and stuff like that. Then I'll go into a brief history of what touchscreen games are. Then we'll do best practices for touchscreen games, analyzing the top games and discussing their control schemes, and porting to a touchscreen device. I'm sorry if you read the description and this isn't what it is, but they made me write that description in 20 minutes, and then I write my talk afterwards, so it's a little different. And then we'll do a Q&A, which hopefully I'll get through this quickly, and then we can all go to lunch. So cool, casual games. What are casual games? There we see some cool ones, but let's start it off. I'm supposed to cover casual games in this talk, so here's my casual games section. So what is a casual game? Is it Peggle? Is it Farmville? Is it Angry Birds? Is it Cut the Rope? Is it Flower? Personally I'd say it's all those. Flower is probably the prettiest of all of those, though. But so who's a casual gamer? There's me playing Peggle, actually. So is it the 30 to 45-year-old woman? That's what we hear a lot, is it's this 30 to 45-year-old woman. But as you can see, that's the 45-year-old woman that I Googled, and she is pretty hardcore. So, I don't even know what she's playing, but she's really into it. Is it the 18 to 24-year-old playing Peggle, wearing their sweet jersey that I'm also wearing right now? Is it the person playing Farmville up in the corner who's supposed to be, learning fashion? Or, is it this girl down here playing with her Wii, sitting way too close to the Wii? It's one of those things where for the last few years as an industry, we've been trying to define what is a casual game, who is a casual gamer, but, I think we're all casual gamers. Those of you who, what's on that?
It's just an off-the-cuff thought. When you ask the question, I think the first definition that comes to mind for me is you are engaged in casual gaming if you can stop and do something else.
Right, very true. So, all of you pulled out your phones and stuff like that. Like, how many of you play games on those phones? Like, yeah. So we're pretty much all casual gamers, right? Because we're all like, oh man, I'm waiting in this line at PAX. I'm just gonna, pull out Cut the Rope or something, play it for a bit, and then, pop on to something else. So, that's my casual game section of this talk, mostly because they wanted me to talk about casual games, so I really had to put that in there. Cool. So now a brief history of game controllers. I got cut off. Damn it. So I threw together a brief history of controllers. This is kind of how I see it, and kind of how how it went. All right, so first off, we've been playing games for thousands of years with this little device that we call the hand. It was intuitive, it was easy to use, pretty much everybody had one, except for that dude who got attacked by a bear and it got ripped off. Your mom can use this, that little baby in the back that was walking around, he can use this hand, pretty intuitive. But then a few years ago, about 30 years ago, we put games on a screen, and for those of us who are professional developers, hooray, we can all have jobs now, right? Our industry now exists. But we were kind of like, all right, so we have this interaction on screen. How are we gonna play games? All these years we've been using our hands to play tabletop games and stuff, and it's like, all right, let's fake it. Let's make a joystick. All right, cool. So this is still pretty simple, pretty intuitive, easy to use, one button, joystick. Fun story, when I was a kid, we had one of these and my friend's button broke, so we actually had to take it apart and put tinfoil on our finger to make the button work, and we touched the circuit, and every time you touch it, you get shocked. So it was like the first force feedback controller in known history. But you really had to think about when you were going to shoot because it kind of hurt. So we had this controller for a while, and we were like, sweet, cool, easy to use. And then all of a sudden we're like, all right, cool, let's add all these freaking buttons. I mean, I'm dialing my parents' phone number now while trying to play a game. All right, so maybe this one has just 4, but these all have like number pads, and these aren't really well known, but I threw them up there anyways. But here's kind of an interesting thing that we see is, as we go from one button, the intuitiveness is really easy, right? You press one button, something happens. But as you can see, as we started adding more buttons, the intuitiveness went down to the point now where there's 11 buttons on a controller. It's not intuitive. But after we had all those crazy buttons, we thought, okay, we're safe. We have the most beautiful controller of all time, the NES controller. Look at that. D-pad, 4 buttons, mostly A and B is all you really use, but select and start was on there to put codes in. And then we moved on to the next generation, and we started getting fancy. There's shoulder buttons on the SNES controller, and you have all these crazy things going on with, I don't know why the buttons are at an angle, but someone smarter than me figured that out. And then, again though, as we start putting more buttons on, the intuitiveness starts to drop. So a little payoff, but All right, then we have the N64 controller. Who else loves this controller? All right, not really sure why we all love this controller. Yeah, exactly, right? So that's the crazy thing about this controller is, you know, if you're playing like GoldenEye, you're holding it one way. If you're playing, I don't know, like Super Smash Brothers, you're holding it another way. You know, so it's kind of weird. This one had, how many buttons are on this controller? I wrote this down somewhere. Something like 10 buttons on this controller. You know, it had a D-pad, the start button, the shoulder buttons, and the trigger on the back that made me feel like I was really killing you when I shot you. Yeah, so 10 buttons and a D-pad and a joystick. And then we have the PS1 controller, which, you know, we all thought was, like, super, you know, ergonomic and, like, perfect for our hands because, you know, it's kind of how we all, you know, sit is like that, right? Because that makes sense. Once again, now 4 shoulder buttons. And then the PS2 came along, we added analog sticks because, you know, the N64 had analog sticks, so let's one-up them and put 2 analog sticks on there because we're that much better. And then this thing, like, look at this fucking controller. Who thought that up? Like, that's insane. Like, okay, well, we're going to be different than the PS2, and we're going to put a little yellow nub as our other analog stick. But, you know, for some reason I love this controller, and it was pretty easy to use. Once again, Nintendo's starting to show us that, hey, what up? We just have a huge, big green button. And then there was the Fat Boy. Who remembers this controller? Like, oh my God, I'm 6'3", and I still could not hold this controller in my hand. So I don't really know who thought this one was a good idea, but as most of you know, when they brought it over to Japan, the Japanese were like, yeah, we can't use this controller because we all have really small hands. So that's where the Slim came out, so luckily we were all saved by that. And then we get to the current generation. You know, I really like the Xbox 360 controller. I think it's very ergonomic and easy to use. The PS3 controller gives me hand cramps, and I actually developed carpal tunnel syndrome from all the PS3 games I played. So thank you, Resistance. And then we have the Wii. So, you know, as we've been going on, the intuitiveness has gone down to pretty much nil, right? So there's, I think, 11 buttons on these controllers, 2 analog sticks, a D-pad, and then, you know, the Xbox button for good measure and the PS button for good measure, just to, you know, throw another button on there for something useful. And then we have the Wii. So the Wii is kind of different, right? So there's still a bunch of buttons going on here, but the main interaction was motion. And my mom gets motion. That's not my mom. I Googled a picture of moms playing Wii, and this lady looked like she was having a good time. So I was like, you're my mom now. Thanks. But, you know, we kind of saw the barrier for entry go down with the motion controllers. People can use these controllers that, you know, have not used a controller since the Atari days. And now we kind of see that we've gone full circle, right? So now we have the Kinect and we have the PlayStation Move. The Kinect uses no buttons, and the PlayStation Move uses a few buttons and has a ball on the top, so, you know, that's cool. But the cool thing about this is we've kind of lowered the barrier of entry with these because it's more intuitive, I guess, to wave your arms and jump up and down, because if you really think about it, like, how many of you have, like, watched, like, for example, my sister does this, like, when she's, like, playing games and when she jumps, she always, like, raises the controller up, and it's like, all right, Nintendo was like, all right, let's just put that in our controller, and then, you know, now Xbox is like, screw controllers, let's just all wave our arms and look silly. So, you know, I'm all for this, because it lowers the barrier of entry, but finally, you know, we've gone full circle, and now we have touchscreen games. And as you can see, Angry Birds has been around for literally thousands of years. This is not a new game, and, you know, they were playing it. I don't really know how this worked, but my friend Mike Balzerzak found this on a distant travel. I don't know how they played this, but the game's been around for a while, apparently. So let's kind of just go through a brief history of what, you can't even see my text at the bottom. Oh, well. Let's go through a brief history of touchscreen games. I think kind of the best way to figure out what touchscreen games is to say, okay, what isn't a touchscreen game? All right, first off, none of those are touchscreen games. Pretty simple, no consoles. No arcade games, especially Golden Sea. You're not a touchscreen game. Screw you, Golden Sea. And I don't know why Sprint is apparently that game. Kind of interesting. But then we kind of get into, okay, what is a touchscreen game? So we've kind of seen this rise, right? So my company's been doing touchscreen games for 15 years. That's our newest product over there. It looks all sleek and Apple-ish. And then the iPhone came around, and the Nintendo DS has a touchscreen. You know, the Android has a touchscreen. The HP Touch Mart was kind of like the first wide commercial released PC that was a touch device. And then the Sony NGP actually has 2 touch devices. It has a touchscreen on the front, and on the back it has a touchpad as well. So these are all games that can have, you know, touch games on them. So, all right, so this next part is going to offend the, like, 6 of you who raised your hands that worked on touchscreen games if you worked on a game like this game. Because now I'm going to kind of get into, okay, so there are games that are on a touchscreen device that aren't touchscreen games. This game right here is not a touchscreen game. It is a game that is on consoles and was ported to a touchscreen and isn't really a touchscreen game because they put a controller on here. The reason I make this like really asshole distinction is because I think game designers are getting really lazy. We're just making games and then shoving them into these devices. And the thing is like that's not really designing a game correctly. So part of what my talk is really focused on is the fact that, hey, look, let's stop being stupid and let's design games correctly for devices. You know, it's cool to have these games on touchscreen devices. I mean, I love having Final Fantasy in my pocket and be like, oh, you know, let's play Final Fantasy for a bit. But we're not really making touchscreen games. You know, there are ways that we could redo the controls for this game and make it a touchscreen game. I'm sure you guys can think of crazy like double touch, triple touch, you know, like Hadouken every time I touch, because that's really all I do when I play this game anyway. But you know, do we really even need this device? I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's like, hey, cool, you have this sweet $500 touchscreen device that you made, but here's a joystick. Like, okay, why is there a joystick for my touch device that I just paid $500 for? I mean, I don't really need that. Why don't you design the game so I can play it with the control scheme that is built into the device? As I said, touchscreen games have been around for 15 years. If you can see this, like, old piece of junk up there, like, you can probably find that in like a shitty dive bar somewhere. That thing's 12 years old, and I still make games for it. Yeah, sometimes I hate my life. But, you know, it's been around for a long time, and that's kind of the crazy history of touchscreen games. So here's really the meat of my talk, right? So this is my expertise, as they said when they asked me to do this, which I guess is not really my expertise, but whatever. So what I did was I decided to pick out a whole bunch of really popular games. These are 5 of the most popular games currently on touchscreen devices. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to really sit down and kind of analyze these games and talk about, you know, what they do correctly or incorrectly with controls and why I think that makes them so successful and so popular. How many of you have played all these games? No? All right. Cool. One. You've played one? All right, cool. Well, all right, who's played Paper Toss? All right, yes. This game is fantastic. This game is, let's see, I have all their sweet little info here. So this is the 10th most popular free app on the iPhone of all time and the #1 free game on the iPhone of all time. And also it's really successful on the Android. So it's kind of a big deal, and I personally love this game. One of my favorite games that I've ever designed was actually kind of ripped off this game, but not really, because I designed the game and then somebody was like, hey, have you played Paper Toss? And I was like, oh shit, I just designed that game. So I had to redesign it. But kind of, for those of you who haven't played, it's pretty simple, right? So you have this little white ball of paper, and you're trying to get it into the trash can there. And that little arrow at the bottom is telling you which direction the wind is blowing from that fan. So you kind of have to, you know, angle it in the other way to get it to curve in. And then the arrow at the very bottom is where you're, like, aiming your shot. So, for example, with this one where it's like 3.4 going this way, I'd want to flick it this way and it would curve in and it looks cool and stuff like that. So some interesting things that they did here. So they left out force, right? So the only thing you really do with this game is you say which direction you're going. You're going to the right or you're going to the left at this extent. In the game I did, we had force in our game, and it ended up being like a disaster, right? Because the way we had to do it was like a field goal kicking game, and you had to kick it at different heights, and we had to map it so that the person, you know, would like release their finger here, so it would go to here. But originally we were like, oh, maybe it's just like how fast they flick it. But when we went into like focus testing, everybody would like flick at different speeds, and there was no control, and it was just like giant fucking disaster. So we put force in our game, and it ended up working somehow. Yay, smart people, I guess. But they left it out here, which makes this game a lot more accessible than my game was. So, now you don't have to worry about how high you're kicking it or anything like that. You're just flicking it. They also left off miles per hour or anything on this descriptor at the bottom. In ours, we had to put miles per hour for the wind. And at the end, it was the wind is going 200 miles per hour. And people were like, how can I kick a football in 200 mile per hour wind? And I'm like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just kick. So they left it off here, so it's just kind of some random number. But the thing is it's a random number. What's the difference between 3.4 and 3.42? There is really no difference in how you kick or flick the ball in this. So it's one of the things where it's cool, you have this number, but it's not really descriptive. It doesn't really mean anything. And also, one of the interesting decisions they made is, so you see that arrow down there, the bigger one at the bottom, it kind of shows where you're flicking to. But the interesting thing about it is there's a set number of places you can actually flick to, so it's not super precise. It's I think there's 13 or 20 or something areas that you can flick to. So it's not 100% mapped to where you're going, but it's to different locations. But the way that they do the reactions to how you're flicking it feels really tactile. It feels like you're actually flicking paper, right? And it's really intuitive because we've all done this before, right? We've all played a little field goal with our paper. We've all chucked paper at somebody. This is an intuitive thing to do, to flick paper. You can put this game in front of somebody and it's so simple and easy to see. You're just here, paper toss, and they're that works, cool. And that's one of the cool things about touchscreen games is we can be really intuitive and easy to play like that. And I think that's part of why this game is so successful, is because it's mimicking a real life action with the control scheme, and that's something we should try and do as much as possible. Oh, I went the wrong way. Cool. How about Cut the Rope? Who here has played Cut the Rope? Awesome, fantastic. If you haven't played this game, start downloading it right now because you're going to want to play it after this talk or while I'm still talking because it's better than anything I'm going to say. This game is absolutely fantastic. Okay, so here's how you play it. You have this little guy at the bottom. His name's Omnom. Already, the name of the guy is enough to pay 99 cents for this game. So basically what you're doing is you have to get that piece of candy right there into his mouth. And I bet you'll have no idea how you do this, but you cut the rope. It's pretty simple, but you have to avoid the spikes, and you have to try and get the stars and stuff like that. And it starts out simple like this, where it's okay, I would cut that top rope, and then I cut the second rope, and then I cut the third rope, and then it'd go into his mouth, and he'd be all I'm done, I'm happy. And it just feels really good, right? Cutting the rope just by sliding your finger just feels natural. It feels like another easy thing to do. And it starts off pretty simple like that, and then they start adding more stuff in. The spikes are actually 4 levels in or something like that. So after you've kind of figured out the basic control scheme, they have that in. But there are a ton of different situations and puzzles, and after you do that for a bit, they start adding cool controls, right? So they have multi-touch in this game, and one of the things that I found interesting as being a touchscreen designer is watching people utterly fail at making multi-touch games. It's interesting, right, because most things that you can do with 2 fingers, you can do with 1 finger, if you really sit and boil it down. But one thing you can't do with 1 finger is cut 2 things simultaneously. So instantly they put that into their game, and I was like, oh my god, you actually got it right, unlike the 2,000 other multi-touch games that I played out there that are just gimmicky and shitty and not fun. So I think that's one thing that's got them going is their multi-touch is necessary to their game. And after you've played for a bit, they start adding more and more control schemes in. There's you can tighten up the rope just by spinning this little dial. You can move things by scrolling it side to side, and the cool thing about that stuff, and there's these bubbles that you can go in and you pop just by touching. And the cool thing about that stuff is it's already controls that we know, right? So if you have a touchscreen device and you're scrolling a page, you just flick it with your finger. It's the same thing in this. We've all popped stuff with our fingers before, so having that happen is simple. And they're using control schemes that not only make sense but are like already being used on a touchscreen device. So it's kind of like, okay, let's look at what is already working, pinch, move, things like that, and let's use that as our control schemes. So like I said, if you haven't played this game yet, just play it because it's fantastic, it's fun, and there's a lot to learn from it. All right, next off, this is an iPad game, so probably less people have played it, but who's played Stick Wars? Anybody? All right, the two of us. We're awesome. So this game was made by one guy, and it's pretty cool. Basically what happens is it's a crazy tower defense game. I couldn't find any pictures where there wasn't a ton going on, but you can kind of see the utter madness of this game. But basically what happens is these guys are coming from this side to attack your wall here, and what you have to do is you click on them and then you flick them up in the air. And how high you flick them is how much damage they do when they fall. So then they like fall and they like explode into little stick pieces. Whoa! And they like go like bleh, and there's blood and giblets and all that stuff that we as gamers love. But then you start getting them coming in on bigger things, and what you can do is you can also pick them up and you can slam them down. And when you slam them down, they actually do AoE damage to everybody around them. So you're kind of using them as weapons. And then after a while, you get this little prison over here, and you can pick them up and drop them in there, and then you start recruiting them, and you can add them to your army. So down here, you have an army, which is all these guys up top, so it's like 25. You press this button, and like a whole army comes out, and they're all like, "Roar!" and they kill things. And then you can have like these bomb guys over in the corner, and like, you know, they run out, and they're like, "Yeah, fuck you," and blow up. And then they have these three other types that you can start adding in. So you have the archers. These are like passive. They're just standing up there. They're like, "Hey, we're archers." And then you have like these workers who are like, "I'm trying to rebuild the wall. Why these guys are fucking it up?" And then you have the mage. So the mage is where the control scheme really starts to add more in. You can see kind of in the far right corner there, that shows like what abilities he has. He has two different abilities. He can launch meteors by like a double touch, and what you do is you basically put over the area that you want to drop a meteor on with your double touch, and he'll drop a meteor down. The other one is kind of like an Angry Bird style thing where you click on him and you pull back and he'll launch a fireball in the direction that you want. And both of those really start adding depth to the game where it just becomes chaotic, because like I'm flicking with one hand and then I'm like trying to drop meteors, and it's just going utterly crazy, and you're like, oh my god. And then there are dragons. So if you haven't played the game and you didn't want to play the game, there's dragons. There you go. But there's some interesting decisions that they made with this, right? So the idea of picking things up and throwing them in the air is, once again, intuitive. I mean, we've all like picked up sticks as kids, and we're like, whoopee! And then they fall and they break, and we're like, yay, I'm happy. And so it's kind of a simple idea, right? So once again, clicking, flicking, easy, good ideas, things that are already being used. But there's also some problems with this game, right? So you start adding these more abilities in, and basically the problem becomes that your hand is like over top of your play field. So these guys are like coming in, and keep in mind this is on an iPad, these guys are like coming in from the side, and you're just like, and it just becomes this is all you're doing, and you're not really paying attention to anything else. Your hand's just flicking as fast as you can. Then
that was my problem with Monster Mayhem.
Yeah, exactly. You're in, like, your hand like just starts to like, oh my god, and you're like covering up the screen, and that's a big problem. But then my absolute biggest problem with this is those are buttons, these things up here. But I couldn't figure out. I played this game for several hours, and I couldn't figure out how to like click those buttons. So I just like mash up there, and next thing I know I have like 82 wizards, and I'm like, but I wanted 82 of those guys. So one of the things that they need to think about, and they actually came out with a sequel for this game, and he fixed some of these problems, was that this touch, right, keep in mind this is an iPad. This is huge. This is not a little fucking iPod. This is a big iPad. And he smashed all these buttons up into a corner and made them like not clickable. So one of the things you have to think of when you're making a touchscreen game is it's like, okay, if I have these buttons, I need to make them obvious. This is obvious. That it is a button, and then make it easy to touch. And also have a reaction when you touch it. When I'm touching these, there's no instant reaction. There's no sound effect or anything like that. That number increases sometimes when I magically hit the, radius of this big. I have big fingers, so don't make your touch area super small. But overall, this is a pretty fun game, and it cost all of the $0 other than the $500 iPad entry fee. Cool. So next up is Angry Birds. Okay, everybody has to have played Angry Birds that has a smartphone, right? Okay. This game is utterly ridiculous. Like, people.
It's completely unpretentious about it.
Yeah, right. So I went to a talk last week at GDC by the guys who made this game, and they got up and they were basically like, "We don't know why we sold 1 billion copies. Yay!" And we're all like, "Yay, you guys suck. You made more money in like a month than I've made my entire life." So this game is one of the top paid. I think it's like number 4 on the iPhone right now. But people were calling this the best game of 2010. Like, you know, Red Dead Redemption came out last year, and other people were like, "No, fuck Red Dead Redemption. Angry Birds is the best game to come out in 2010." And I'm like, "You guys are stupid, but okay." And I like, this is what I make for a living, and I'm just like, "No, screw you, Red Dead." Woo. So this game also has probably one of the most rabid fan bases of any game I've ever seen. Like, they take us hardcore gamers who are like here in cosplay, like they're like, "Oh, screw you, we're gonna have protest days against the violence between, you know, birds and pigs," and I'm like, "What are you guys talking about?"
Well, the animation with like Miss Piggy and Daffy Duck and everyone speaking out against violence is hilarious.
Yeah, and I love this stuff. But for those of you who haven't played the game, here's a quick video. Can you show me how to play?
Sit down. Sit down, Mom.
Okay, sit down.
This one, 7.
Oh wow, good shot. Can I play Christmas Birds? Can I have a try?
Oh my God.
So this 2-year-old kid can play Angry Birds. Yeah, I mean, I really don't need to talk too much about the control scheme. If a 2-year-old can pick up Angry Birds and become incredibly addicted to where he's like fighting his dad off, he's like, "Fuck you, Dad, I'm playing Angry Birds," then I think you did something right with your control scheme. But for those of you who don't know, I'll explain it really quick. So you have these birds. They're angry. I don't really know why.
Pigs stole their eggs.
The pigs stole their eggs. That's right. Thank you. So these pigs stole their eggs, and basically what you do is you click on here, and then you pull back, and then it follows the angle that you're shooting, and you're trying to destroy the stuff and kill the pigs. You know, if you hit that TNT, then there's big explosions, the pigs all die, lots of points, and the birds are still angry because they're emo or something like that. But the cool thing about this game that I've kind of learned through a bunch of games that I've designed is, you know, it's a simple mechanic. They also have like pinch and zoom and stuff like that. Once again, devices, you know, things that we all know how to do that have touchscreen devices. But it's a simple control scheme, right? You fire and then you just kind of sit there and you're like, "Woo, cool stuff's happening," just like Peggle. But the cool thing about this is after they kind of you've played that way for a while, they're like, "You know what? We're happy you're enjoying it this way, but you're probably getting bored, right?" So they add another level on top of it. So you have these basic birds and they just fire that way. But then they start adding different types of birds. There's one that like speeds up when you touch again. And then there's another that like splits into 3, and these specific birds are for specific puzzles. And the cool thing about that is like you have this basic control scheme. It's fun to watch the birds hit things and things to die and stuff like that. But then you're kind of like, "All right, I've been doing this for a while. I'm bored." And they're like, "Oh, wait for this. Now you have to have timing and like fire this at the exact perfect time." And what that does is that really keeps the player engaged in what they're doing, right? Because at first they're just firing and they're forgetting, but now they have to like watch until that precise moment and be like, "Fuck, I missed. I have to hit the reset button and start all over again," which is like, if you watch people play Angry Birds, they spend more time just resetting the level than they actually do playing the game. It's like half the game is just resetting and being like really pissed off. But you know, that's really cool that they added this like second layer on top of it, and it just adds another layer of complexity, but also adds a layer of engagement and involvement and interaction that the game doesn't initially have.
In an airport and watch truly casual players do it. Many of them don't discover the second layer and
just continue to hit the levels with their head on the first layer.
Really? That's interesting. I actually, on my flight from GDC, I was like walking to the bathroom, and there was no joke 15 people on my flight playing Angry Birds, and I was like, what the hell? This is like, I was like, this game came out like 7 months ago, but then I found out there was an update, and people were like playing like Valentine's Birds.
I was last year, and I was sitting next to a guy who had just bought his iPad the day before, and the first thing he did was watch one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and the second thing he did was start playing Angry Birds. And he didn't even know, he barely even knew how to play it. I had to tell him about, like, you hit the thing and the bird splits up into 3 things. But he was completely, oh my God.
Yeah. One of the interesting things.
With his iPad for a day.
One of the interesting things about that, though, is right. What you guys are saying is that people don't really realize that there's a second mechanic, right? And one of the things that this game doesn't do well is really tell you that, hey, you can split things up. People don't really get that. They should have some sort of thing that pops up and is like, you know, you haven't done this yet.
They actually do, and people dismiss it without ever looking at it.
It shows up the first time, right? But first time only, right? So that's one of the things I've learned is that people will always dismiss and never read help. They will just skip right through it. But if you start having a little thing that's just kind of in the background, it's like, ooh, press again, then maybe somebody will actually pay attention to it. But this game is really awesome. My only really complaint is that I really suck at it. Actually, that 2-year-old is better than me at this game. I got like 12 levels in and then was like, hey, somebody else beat this game for me because I can't beat a level. So, yeah, I kind of suck, but it's a great game. All right, so next up is Pocket God. Who's played this game? All right, who likes this game? All right, cool. The 3 of you come talk to me after this because I don't know why you like this game. So this game is, let's see, it is the number 3 paid app on the iPhone of all time. So this game is stupid successful. Not number 3 paid game. This is the number 3 paid app. So like people who like, you know, buy, I don't know what's popular on the iPhone, I have a Droid, but you know, they buy like this must-have app and then they're like, and then I'm going to buy Pocket God because I don't know why. So I wanted to put this game in here because this is a game that I personally don't like and I think has a lot of problems with its control scheme, but is wildly successful. So for those of you who haven't played this game, basically you're a god. It's a god game. And you have these little guys that are pygmies, and you can torture them. See, this guy's being eaten by ants. That's kind of fun. And you can do all these different things with them. In the video at the beginning, you saw you can like pick them up and like dangle them, and this like shark down here will like come and eat them and be like, oh. And then you can like flick them into the background and like get them into that like volcano, and they like catch on fire and stuff like that. But then at the very top, you have like this crazy drop-down menu, and through this menu, you can do all these other interactions. Like you can drop a fishing pole and they can fish. I don't know why, but they can fish. And then they can do all this other stuff, and the game's been updated like ridiculous. I think there's 47 chapters, and every chapter has a different like setting and different objects and things you can interact with. But the crazy thing about this is like I couldn't really figure out what to do because it's a sandbox game. So I pressed that plus button, and like this thing showed up, and it's like, here's help. They have 27 pages of help. As we were just saying there, like people will dismiss like a one-line blurb about help. I'm not going to read 27 fucking pages of help, man. Like, what is this, a like flight app sim from 20 years ago? The cool thing is they have these like mini games that are in the game, and the mini games are actually fun. And worth the 99 cents. So maybe that's why the 3 of you raised your hand that you like this game, is the mini games. I don't know, but that's not why I like this. But the game has a lot of weird control mechanics that are just messed up. So you can pick the pygmies up by like picking them up, and then you can drop them in different areas, right? So if I drop the guy like here, he should fall on this. If I drop him like here, he'll fall in the water. The thing is, I've played this game for several hours, and I would like drop the guy right above, and he would fall into the water. And I'm like, what the? I don't understand your controls. And then there's like that flicking mechanic, which at first is just like a fun little gimmick, but later on it becomes important because they had bosses, and that's like how you attack is by like slaughtering your pygmies into them. But I'm like sitting there like flicking as fast as I can, and like 1 in 10 pygmies actually fly. So the controls are not precise, and they're kind of like fucked up actually. And then And then, like, a lot of the interactions, which they easily could have done through touch mechanics, they added to the menu. So it's like, I want to drop a fishing pole. I have to go through this menu system and drop a fishing pole. Like, you could have just made that a touch mechanic of some kind. But they do have one really, really awesome touch mechanic in this game, and that is you can draw a double rainbow with 2 fingers. And then all the pygmies are like, oh my god, double rainbow! Which is clearly, like, that was worth the 99 cents. I just kept doing it. I was like, and they're all like, double rainbow! You can also shoot them with lightning, which is pretty fun, which is like you like draw an arrow. I don't really get the point of this game. I think you're supposed to torture and kill the little guys, or maybe you keep them alive. I haven't figured that out yet. So if you know, let me know. But there's like 3 main takeaways I had for this game, which is if you're going to update your game constantly, don't keep putting crap in your game and then expect someone to be able to pick it up like me, 6, 7 updates after it's come out, and expect them to figure it out right away, or be like, okay, here, 10 pages of help, figure out how to play. So if you're going to add complexity on top of it, you have to do it in a way where it's not all right up front right away, which is what this game has. You need some sort of in-game help to nudge the player forward. Like you guys were saying with Angry Birds, there's that little thing that pops up that's like, hey, touch again. But the problem is people will ignore that stuff. So you basically either have to force them to do that action, or you have to keep putting it in their face until they do it. And then also, if you're going to use touch controls in your game, for God's sake, make them responsive and accurate. If they aren't, you are just being an asshole, and you should have just made your game a console game or a PC game and, sold it to 12 people. The reason I think this game is successful, though, is it came out really early in the iPhone's life cycle, and they update it, I think, every, 2 months, and they've done a lot of transmedia, so there's, a comic book series on this game, there's, a webisode, series, and there's, all this other stuff that I think makes this game popular, that aside from its gameplay. But yeah, so things to be learned from this section here. Okay. There was a lot to go through in there, but we're almost done here. So if you have intuitive and responsive controls when possible. Once again, as we talked about, if your controls are going to be in the game touchscreen, have them be intuitive, have them be mechanics that are already known. Don't make your controls too granular. What I mean by this is don't make your touch areas super small. A lot of us have big fingers, and if you're like, hey, hit these 3 pixels, you're like, nope, I can't do it. Don't add unnecessary features that will make your control scheme overly complex. If you keep adding features like they do in Pocket God, next thing you know, there's a 10-finger control scheme going on, and your hands are just all wrapped up, and you don't really know what's going on. Use known control mechanics as often as possible. If you can add pinch and squeeze for zoom, and you can have spinning your finger for stuff, scrolling. That's all good stuff. It's already known. It's stuff that people are using every day in applications that aren't game applications. So keep those around. Don't force multi-touch. By this, I mean don't put multi-touch in your game and it be some crazy gimmick that isn't fun or necessary. Make it something that you have to use multi-touch to do, like cutting 2 ropes at once. Avoid making your user cover the screen with their finger/hand. This is a big one. This is probably the #1 mistake that people make when the first time they design a touchscreen game. And it's like, okay, I have this little tiny device here, and I want to play this game, but my whole hand is covering the screen, and I can't see what's going on. So you have to think around that, how am I going to make it so that the stuff that's necessary for the player to see is not being blocked by the user's hand?
Can you push into that a little more, provide examples of how you would take a UI and improve it?
Yeah, I'm actually going to talk about porting games, and I'm going to give some direct examples about that specific thing. If something feels natural, go with it. That's incredibly sexual now that I read that. But what I mean by that is, if the control scheme seems natural, flicking a paper this way or doing whatever, go with that. Don't add something just because it sounds like a better mechanic, but use something that feels natural. And then make your touch areas clear and precise and not small, which is what we saw with that one game. All right, so porting. I put this on here so I could say now for something completely different. For those of you who get that, thank you. For those of you who don't. But it's not really that different. So things to keep in mind when porting your game to another device. So remember, you want to make this game an actual touchscreen game. So you want this, this is Auditorium. If you haven't played this game, it's fantastic. Not that. You don't want to port your game, and be like, oh, so here's my port. It just has the controls tattooed on the front. You want to actually sit and think about what control scheme can I use that's different. So if you can't, the first thing that I always do when I'm like, okay, so here's this concept that we've taken from a Flash game or something, is I'm like, okay, here are all the controls that I know of, and I'll throw them up on a whiteboard, and then I'll start brainstorming what touch controls I can use to do that. So, for example, it's like, I want to do a Hadouken, maybe it should be 2 fingers or something like that. But you have several options, right? So you can't figure out touch controls. Here are your 3 options. 1, don't make the game. That's the one I highly suggest. 2, make it a game on a touchscreen device with an on-screen controller, so that. Or 3, have a bunch of buttons that do stuff. So then all of a sudden your game just becomes like buttons, and you're just pressing buttons, and, it's a touchscreen game, woo. But if you are, here are the things you have to worry about, right? Make it feel natural and correct. Don't block the playfield of the important game pieces. If you can do this stuff, you're going to look like a badass game designer. Number 1, which is most important for all game designers, is to look like a badass. And also, people will really be excited that you're taking your IP and you really care about it, and you're taking the time to make an actual really good port of it. So one company that does this really, really well is PopCap. If you guys haven't played PopCap games, then I'm sorry, you should play them. I would suggest Peggle, which is down in the bottom right, or Plants vs. Zombies, which has zombies. Play it. It's really all you need to know. I'm a PopCap fanboy. As you saw from my first slide of my face, I was wearing the Plants vs. Zombie head, and I prescribe to the theory of what would PopCap do. Everybody used to have those like WWJD bracelets. Like I have what would PopCap do, like tattooed on my side right here. So that may kind of come off here that I'm kind of a fanboy. But I wanted to talk about that stuff that you were asking me to delve into a little more. So I'm going to use Plants vs. Zombies, which started out as a PC game, and uses the mouse control. So it's not the hardest game to port, but it does some really cool things with UI and stuff like that. So this is Plants vs. Zombies on PC, and it's another tower defense game. And basically, for those of you who haven't played this game, what's happening is these zombies are shambling and coming across towards your house, which is over here, represented by lawnmowers, and they're trying to get to your house and eat your brains, because what else do zombies do except that? And you have to protect your house by planting these plants. So you click on a plant up top, and you drop it in here, and it's like, all right, this one here like shoots these little peas out to like attack the guys, and like these are resources, and that thing will eat them and stuff like that. So it's mostly clicking mechanic and stuff like that, but also in this picture you can see it gets really, really crazy. And there are these like sun drops. These also are resources which you have to click on. So there's a lot of clicking going on. There's a lot of information you can't see. At the bottom right here is a meter that shows you how the zombies are coming, and it kind of gives you more information. And then the menu button is up top in the right, which also you can't see. Awesome, cool. So here's the iPhone port. So you can kind of see right here that they already changed the complete layout of the UI. So they put these buttons over here on the left. The number 1 reason being the fact that if your buttons are at the top, then you're always covering your device to press the button, right? So this is kind of a good example of that. Is they put it on the left here so you can kind of see it, keeps it open, you click and you click, as opposed to covering it up with your hand when you click on the device. They also put the meter up top, which now you can see because, again, your hand is over the device and you would constantly be covering that. And they also kind of added, as you can see, that top shovel. The button is much bigger now and the menu is bigger. Interesting thing about this game, when it first came out, the menu system was shit on the iPhone. It was not good at all. They didn't optimize it, and they listened to their users' feedback and they re-optimized it for touch controls. But they also added another level of interestingness.
But that's logic. Should you put the things on the right, since most people are right-handed?
So that's interesting. I actually noticed this. A lot of games, like, so for example, the Stick Wars game, stuff is coming from the right, and I think it's just because, like, that's how tower defense games are working. Like, all the stuff's coming from the right, so you don't want it to cover on the right-hand side because you'd be covering the guys coming in. And I guess the way they see it, I've never made a tower defense game, but the way they see it as what's most important is the scene of the guys coming in, and you don't want to cover that up. By logic, yeah, you're right. Oh, something.
That might have more to do with language,
You read left or right? Yeah, good point. What's up?
Movies use the same thing. Villains traditionally go from right to left, while protagonists go from left to right. It's like you said, our reading, the way we read it, the psychological thing.
That's cool. Yeah, so there you go. Other people answered your question for me. Thank you, guys. But they also added this interesting thing, right? So inevitably, you're still going to cover the screen when you're placing objects. So what they added was this kind of row column highlight. So what's happening here is I click this guy and I want to place him right there. And what happens is I'm still covering the device a little bit, but now I can see exactly where it's going to be on the row column because this highlight is showing off. They do that because, you know, your hand can be covering it up, and also you aren't going to see directly where you're clicking. These little squares are pretty small on an iPhone, so if you have a bigger hand, it's more likely that you're going to be imprecise. So things to think about when you're porting. Did that go into that in depth enough for you? Because if not, I can kind of like go into.
If you have more examples, it'd be great. But
yeah, well, that's all I have for slides. But come talk to me afterwards, and we'll talk about the stuff. So things to think about when you're porting. Think of the control scheme. Will it even work on a touch device? If it won't, just cut it out. Don't even make this game. Figure out how to replicate the controls using a touch mechanic. This is really important that you're going to use an actual touch mechanic again. If not, you're just doing your IP injustice. Optimize placement to make sure you aren't blocking out the screen while trying to play the game. That's kind of what we covered there with all that stuff. Optimize placement of buttons and layouts of menus. And then profit. If you can do all these things when you're making a port, especially profit, then you're doing your job well. Profit, I found, is the most important thing in the game industry. So there you go. The interesting thing that I've learned about this porting, right, is so PopCap has ported Plants vs. Zombies to every device out there. Not too long after they did this iPhone port, they did an iPad port and completely changed up the layout, again, optimized for HD. And the thing is, it matters, right? So I know people who have bought this game on iPhone, iPad, PC, Xbox 360, and play it on all the devices. So if you're adding features to your game and you're making it better for each device and each iteration, if people care, people are going to play your game.
give suggestions on how to organize a source base for doing that.
A source code base?
Yeah.
So the interesting thing is, right, so PopCap has their own engine that they've rolled themselves, right? So they kind of have, from what I've talked to them, is they kind of have, like, you know, the central, like, engine repository, and then they kind of have, like, each dev outside that. If you're using Unity, like we use, then, yay, one button, click, deploy, goes to all devices. But I haven't really worked on, like a C++ code base going to a whole bunch of different devices. So the best way that I could think of was have individual projects for each game pointing at a single source. So it's like, you know, if you have your iPhone game over here, then that's a different project, but it's pointing at the engine source or the main game source, and then you're doing cuts on top of that with them.
So far, I'm not doing really cross. I'm doing iPad and iPhone, but I'm also using Corona. So the easiest thing for me to do is just detect the screen size at launch and lay things out accordingly.
Yeah, so I used to be a programmer. I was a programmer for a few years, and when I was a programmer at my current company, we would have like 6 or 7 different devices that we would deploy to, and we did a hacked up job, right? So it's like, if this device, if this device, if this device, and the code just looks like shit, right? So I'm thinking you want a more elegant solution than that.
I mean, it gets even worse when, you know, if you go Android and iPhone, your UI primitives just have to be different.
Right, right.
But you still want to share as much as you can because it feels better.
Right, yeah. No, it's an interesting problem, right? And it's one of the things where it's like, you need to talk to a programmer that's much smarter than me. But I can help you as much as possible or get you in touch with somebody who's actually done that. So, like I said, a lot of things to go over. I really love giant walls of text slides. So here's this one. You can contact me. That's me on Twitter. That's my email. I'm going to be posting these slides, so if anybody wants them, and also I'll be posting all this text that I didn't actually read on my blog as well. So this is my final slide because I was taught a long time ago, don't put a slide that says Q&A because then people will just be sitting there reading Q&A over and over again instead of actually listening to what's being said. So this way you're at least getting something out of this. So that's me. I'm done. Questions? What's up?
There are a few people, a lot actually, who argue that a physical interface is more intuitive than touch interface. And although touch is really popular right now, I was wondering if you have any speculation as to what's going to come after touch. Like, will there be a return to more physical-based interfaces, maybe enabled by robotics and feedback, something like that?
So you mean by that you mean like a controller being physical and then non-physical being touch? Is that what you're saying?
Like a physical controller that maybe doesn't use buttons, that interfaces.
Oh, okay. So like you almost like you wear it. Because I mean I think that's like really the next level is like, you know, who remembers like what, like 10, 15 years ago we had like VR and they'd like put it in a mall and like you'd wear this thing and like hold this like crappy controller and it was like all sweaty and stuff like that. And you were still interacting in a physical space, you were moving around naturally and then using this controller to do things. I'm not sure if that's where we're going to be headed next, but I think the idea of like where Kinect is, but there needs to be something physical that you're actually touching because right now Kinect just feels very weird for games where you're interacting with something, right? Like it makes sense for Dance Central because like I'm doing jumping jacks, woo! But like if I'm playing with an actual device, I want to be holding something, I want to be touching something. But I don't know if, you know, a lot of us are biased because we are pretty much, I would say probably everybody in this room is a hardcore gamer, so we are a little biased because we're using physical controllers every day to play games. You know, it may be more intuitive. Maybe that's what people want. It's just touching nothing.
What about bringing together like a board game and, you know, if Microsoft Surface did the sell?
Yeah. So how many of you have seen Catan on Microsoft Surface? Settlers of Catan. So I think that is kind of where we're headed, right? So the way that game works is you have this touch device, but then you have like physical dice. You have physical like cards. You have all this stuff that's physical, but it's not like it's like almost like this clear object that is having something projected onto it. So it's like I think there's a set of dice, and then there's a set of like these little like cards for Catan. And the way it works is, you know, you're touching the screen, but then at the same time you have this like physical device, so it feels like you're holding something physical. I think that's kind of like we're going to see like this cross blend of things, like what you're saying. As for like console gaming, I think we're just going to keep moving more and more towards like you know, movement controls and stuff like that, except for first-person shooters. We're always going to have PC to rock out on first-person shooters, thank God. So does that kind of answer your question? Okay, cool. What's up?
What about using vibrations when you're hearing?
Like haptic feedback?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? I mean, I think force feedback's always good because it brings you another sense closer to the game, right? You know, so when I was playing Centipede on Atari and getting shocked every time I shot, it felt like I was really, you know, shooting that gun. So yeah, I think as long as you have the option for people to turn it off, because some people find haptic feedback really fucking annoying.
Be judicious in applying it, or it just becomes this constant stream of buzz.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's one of those things where it's just like, you know, it's like audio, right? So it can be used to enforce a feature, enforce something more, but it shouldn't be like, you know, your go-to gimmick or mechanic or something like that. So.
My question is about interfaces and motivation for like people putting things like the latest video released a couple months ago, and like from a podcast found out like it was through Twitter spaces, like a lot of people are just holding off for their private version. Like you're not buying it, I'll play it once, like that. Or touch it. have any insights into like why has caused people to just feel
I think it's one of those things where it's like, the difference is, right, I can play an iPad game anywhere, right? I can carry that device around as opposed to being physically tied to my PC. And for a while there, people were like, okay, well, you can connect your PC game to Facebook, but now we have all that connection online too on an iPad. I think what we're starting to see is people would rather buy their devices or buy their games on devices that they can constantly have with them, right? So it makes more sense to have a Bejeweled on your iPhone or your Droid or something like that, because you can play it in line here or something like that, as opposed to, if it's on your PC or on your laptop, it's a much more, it takes a lot more to turn on a PC. It takes a lot more to do that stuff. I think that's why a lot of people are waiting around. What we have to do is we have to add, features to each iteration, right? And that's another interesting thing, right? PopCap has added new feature sets to all of their touch screen games because the games are coming from PC. But now people are expecting their games to come on touchscreen device, so they need to have special features on their PC games. The thing is, they're not really too worried about it because they're making $1 bajillion no matter what.
I mean, but isn't that going to influence like the development process? Like, well, we're going to end up on touch, and that's probably going to be primary target. Like, should they start with that first?
I mean, if I was them, I would start with what I knew was going to be the most successful, and I would make the game there. But for PopCap, they have separate teams for each of their porting. So the way that they work is they have like a core PC team that is developing new IP or new ideas, and they're building their game, and then they're porting it to each device. And they have a team that is coming up with new features for that. So that's why they do it that way. I would pick whatever's most successful, and I would start with that. So if people were telling me you need to make this game on iPhone, or like, my fan base is rabidly saying that we want the game on this device, then I would probably have started Bejeweled on that device and then moved it to PC. But that's just me.
I was curious if you played Infinity Blade, what you thought of it. That's a pretty interesting combination of really satisfying swipe controls and graphics.
Yeah, so I haven't played it, but I've seen it, and I think it's a really interesting idea, right, because it's kind of taken a more hardcore mechanic into the touch screen. I think it's a good, like, cross coming in, but Infinity Blade? I'm sorry. I think it's a good, like, we're bringing this to a more, it's a better level, we're bringing this to a better, like, hey, look, hardcore developers building the game on a touchscreen device, but it can get better. They need to hire a casual game designer to design the controls. What's up?
Speaking of Infinity Blade, what are the mechanics in that game? The way you do magic gesture-based, like action drugs, like things happen. What do you think about gesture-based control schemes in general?
So the interesting thing about gesture-based control schemes is if you're doing localization, which is a really interesting thing about iPhone, right, is like nobody does localization, but for my company, like I said, we localize to 33 countries. So like gestures have to be not, they can't be like a dollar sign or something, right, because that isn't universal. So if it is like an X or an O, that's fine. As long as it makes sense, I'm cool with any type of gesture control scheme, right? As a programmer, it's not the easiest thing to do, but as long as it makes sense and it's always going to pick it up. A few years ago we had really shitty gesture recognition, so I would be like no gestures at all. But now it's pretty simple to write gesture recognition. So as long as it makes sense and it can be localized if you're localizing your game.
What about instead of buttons?
Instead of buttons, I would.
11 buttons, like not teach your user 11 gestures.
Instead of buttons, I would always go for touch. So yeah.
How do you feel about using the iPhone accelerometer?
It's still using the device, so I'm cool with it, because it's not, if you're doing that instead of putting buttons, like whatever, then I think that's better.
Remember, no one can see the device if they're swinging around.
Yeah, that is a big problem, right? It's like playing a racing game and like going like this. You like have to like tilt your head at the same time. If it makes sense for the game, then accelerometer's cool. Like yeah, if it feels right, if it feels natural, then go for it. Like doodle jump is like perfect for that because you can still see the game and stuff like that, but you're not. that game would be a little harder to do with touch because you're like just scrolling your finger back and forth. But with accelerometer, it works really well. So, it's once again, it's designing the game to the device. It doesn't have to be touch. If it's designed for the device, then it's better.
That's one I've actually been thinking about a lot lately, and I think probably one of the closest analogies I can think of is the way, for instance, in a game like the Diablo or the StarCraft franchise, typically you can do everything by clicking on things on the screen. You don't have to know the hotkeys in order to be able to play the game. You watch the pros play, and every single command they're doing is a hotkey.
Yeah.
If you have acceleration or tilt sensitivity, it's also good for a touch screen-based way to do the same thing. But one of the things that I've been thinking is that the accelerometers allow us to engage the kinesthetic part of our brain that has an enormous bandwidth.
Right.
So part of your brain, it's why paper talk is so successful. You have a large portion of your brain which is dedicated hardware for processing that kind of information. It's like a GPU or something. It's built for it.
Right.
And so, for instance, like if you have, as a very, very simple example, if you have an application which is meant to view a picture, and the picture is bigger than the screen, so you can swipe around its hand. You could also build it that you could tip, and if you get the way of the end response or force the tilt rate, pan through by sliding the image to one side. If you get the force response to say correct, it will pick that up and instantly start to adapt to figure out how fast they need to tip things.
Right.
Because there is just, and very quickly.
Right. Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like it feels natural, right? So if you can go with things, like I said, if you can go with things that feel natural, it allows people to come into the game faster and stuff like that. So it's after